Hi there, this is Dr. Green. What I want to do in this video is to demonstrate how students can research and then write a paper for one of their modules. What I'm going to choose in this particular demonstration video is the discussion forum and how you might go about doing your paper. The first thing that I would recommend is downloading the paper format that you're going to use. I've asked students to use a forum called Announcements. Let me open that up. And in that forum, you're going to see several documents, and this document list is going to grow. I'm showing you this. This is from the first day of the term, but this is going to continue to grow. So please come back to this on a frequent basis to see what I've added. But what you're interested in right now is this APA template. So you go to announcements and then locate APA template, click on that, and then down here it says APA 7th template, and it's a Word document. So click on that, and then that will download it, and you click on it, and there is the template. Okay, so what you want to do is go through this template, and you're going to actually, what you'll see here is sections and how you need to complete those particular sections. For instance, this is how you would compile your reference section. So it's at the very end of the paper, and it's done in a very particular way. We use APA to do our references. In the body of the paper, you're going to notice that there is a title page. I recommend not doing the title page except for two assignments that you have. One is your written assignment, and the second is your group project paper that you'll be doing like in week 6 or 7. And in but for the discussion forum and for the paper that you write for me, you don't need to have a title page. So you could just get rid of this and then just hit the delete and bring all of this up. And then you can begin writing your paper. You want to keep that title page for your written assignment, and you want to keep it for the group project paper. So here we begin with, in a paper, we begin with a title. So your paper should have a title. This is called, in APA, this is called a first level heading. So your paper title is your first level heading. So we'll come back to this. In this paragraph, we don't have any this is a second level heading. What is sociology? It's called a second level heading. For your first paragraph, you don't use a second level heading. This is simply your introduction to your paper. So in this paragraph or couple paragraphs, the first couple paragraphs, what you're doing is you're writing your introduction, and we'll get into that again here shortly. Then you begin breaking down your paper into the sections or how you want to present the content of your paper. So you do that using section headings. This is a second level section heading. So you'd put that in bold, and then you begin writing the content for that particular section. Then you move on to another section. You put in your second level heading, and that's the next section of your paper. And just like the first section, you continue to write. You may have in your paper third level headings, fourth level headings, and fifth level headings. It's unlikely that you will have these. You may have third level headings, but I doubt very much if you'll have fourth and fifth level headings. But I can't predict that. But I know that you will have second level headings and you will have this first level heading, which is the title of your paper. Then you want to have at the end of your paper a section called references. And this is where, in alphabetical order, you would, now this shouldn't be there necessarily, but this is where you would put your references in alphabetical order. Okay. So let's go back. This is the template we're going to use. So let's leave this for now, and let's go back to the assignment. And let's look at what our first paper is going to look like. So we go to week 1, unit 1, and let's go to the discussion forum and open it up. And what you'll want to do is make sure that you read all of this introductory material. This tells you what you need to do. You need to write a paper. You need to then respond to at least 3 peers. This is the way that you will grade your peers' work. So you'll give 3 peers a letter grade, and well, actually a numeric grade, and then you're going to provide them with written comments. So let's go down to discussion 1 and let's look at what we're going to be writing about the first week. So in discussion 1, it states, and this is in every one of these assignments, this text here and this text here. Your assignment is to research and write about. Okay, and then it'll tell you here what it is that you're supposed to do. So read this entire section, and here it states, in the 1930s, industrial psychologist Elton Mayo was commissioned to perform a series of experiments at Western Electric Hawthorne plant. These are known as the Hawthorne studies, designed to observe worker performance and output levels in varying illumination conditions. Illumination conditions meant lighting. So they wanted to see how do people work in various lighting. So if the light's real bright, how do they work? If the light was very dim, how did they work? And they created a formal study called the Hawthorne studies. The so-called Hawthorne or observer effect has led to many organizational theories. And this course is about various theories, and this is one of them, which were advanced to understand, explain, and predict worker behaviors. So here you're getting a hint at even what this course is about: theories and behaviors. Okay, so your assignment in this first paper is to research, and I'm going to explain this: research and write about one of the following essay topics. So you would read both of these and you would determine which of these 2 you want to write your paper about. So let's look at this. Research and discuss the Hawthorne experiments and their relevance to organizations today. What have we learned about worker behavior since the time these original experiments took place? The other question that you could write about is define and discuss the behaviors of micromanagement, specifically how they might relate to the observer, i.e., using Hawthorne. No manager wants to be labeled as a micromanager. So, what can managers do to regularly interact and supervise people in ways that increase motivation and build trust? So, implied there is that micromanagers tend to decrease motivation, and it really decreases the level of trust. What you need to do is question, first of all, you want to question these assumptions. So you would do that by asking questions of the question. So, is it true in all cases, as this seems to imply, that micromanagement always decreases motivation and always decreases levels of trust? Is that always true? I would tend to say no. Others might say yes. But am I basing that purely on my personal opinion and my own observations in the corporate world? And those are valid, but only to a point. In graduate school and graduate level work, we need to call on what we term the literature, and we review or research in the literature what others who are considered experts in the field are saying. So, what experts are there out there? What literature exists? And what is that literature saying regarding micromanagement, motivation, trust, and so on? Or what is the literature saying regarding the first question? Have we learned anything about worker behavior since the time that the Hawthorne studies were done? If so, what? So all of that needs to be researched and discussed in light of the topic, which is the Hawthorne experiments. So you need to frame your research around, first of all, understanding what were the Hawthorne experiments and what did they conclude, and then what have we learned since then, and what is the literature saying about what we've learned, and we need to research that. So I want to focus here now on where do we go to find that information? Where do we go to find our resources? The place that we do not go is to Google, unless it is Google Scholar. But do not go to Google and simply type in a search term like Hawthorne effect or anything else and pull up a lot of content from Google. At the graduate level, it won't work. It doesn't count in your list of references. And the first thing I read, and really I think any student should read, is a person's reference section. The reference section tells the reader, it gives a hint at the quality of the paper. If the quality of the resources is, let's say, excellent, then there's a good chance that the quality of the paper is going to be pretty good. So it might be worth a read. When I go to an article, and the first thing I do is I always look at the abstract first, and then I look at the reference section. And if I see a lot of stuff out there in the reference section that just I've never heard of, or does not look like it comes from a scholarly journal, peer reviewed journal, I'm not going to probably waste my time reading that particular article. The same would be true of any paper that you write. If your references are from Google and a lot of that stuff out there is just junk, chances are your paper is not going to be, it won't have sufficient support to be considered really valid research. And it really probably is going to be nothing more than your personal opinion. And although people that love you care, in the academic world, that doesn't go very far. So what you need to do is make sure that the references that you select are high quality, scholarly, peer reviewed references. So let's take a look at how we go about doing that. So if you go to your menu at the top of your Moodle screen, you'll see something called Resources. If you click on Resources, you'll see U of People Library. Click on that, and this opens up the library. Now, go to JSTOR, this one in the middle. Click on it, and you're going to see that you have some options here for research. So here it says link to JSTOR, link to the Library and Information Resource Network, or Ask a Librarian. What I would do is go to JSTOR, go through, if you're not familiar with JSTOR, and make sure that you understand what JSTOR is. It's a digital library. It's got a lot of academic scholarly works. These are, as I already suggested, the majority of those articles that you're going to find out there are peer reviewed, which is critical. What does peer reviewed mean? It's defined as a process of subjecting an author's scholarly work, research, or ideas to the scrutiny of others who are experts in that field. So just to give you an example, I have my PhD or doctorate degree is in the field of human and organizational systems. Based on my work, my doctoral dissertation, I was asked by a journal to do a peer review of an article that was submitted by someone in, I think they were from Italy. And so I peer reviewed that article and sadly found that it was mostly plagiarized. And so my review failed that particular article. I returned it to the editor of the journal and let the editor know that the article was mostly plagiarized. And so that article was rejected. It was never published. So that's what a peer review is. It's experts or scholars who review that material. Unless you have a PhD, and that doesn't mean, for instance, I could not peer review an article in physics. I don't have that training. I don't know physics well enough that I could ever do a peer review. But I do know organizational development. I know theories, and I know them at a doctorate level. And so I am considered to be or possess a certain expertise in that particular field. And so across the University of the People, you will find various instructors who have PhDs, and those PhDs have expertise in any number of disciplines. And so they serve as the experts in the particular fields that they're teaching. Okay, so like for instance, I teach, not only do I teach this course, but I also teach an undergraduate course in an introductory course to sociology, which is it's a really a very fun course. So let's go back to this and let's click the JSTOR link if you want to find articles and ebooks. So let's link to JSTOR. And here it says we're going to now have the opportunity to do some searching and explore the world's knowledge, cultures, and ideas. So I want to go through and demonstrate what process you might want to follow as you're doing your research. So we're doing some work on Hawthorne. Hawthorne. So if I type in Hawthorne, and notice that if I type in that, I have 12,236 results. That's a lot. There's no way that you will be able to go through that many results. However, even if we don't go any further in our search or developing any further search criteria, that we still have the fact that this is sorted, this list here is sorted by relevance. We could change that if we wanted to. We could say, well, I don't care so much about relevance. I want to see what's newest, or I want to see the oldest. But let's just stick with relevance and see what JSTOR came up with. So here it says, here's an article called The Hawthorne Effect. What did the original Hawthorne studies actually show? This comes from the Scandinavian Journal of Work, Environment, and Health. This is a scholarly journal. Therefore, this article would be an acceptable article for you to use if it supported your particular paper, the research you're doing. Here's an article that is put out by the American Journal of Sociology. Was there a Hawthorne effect? That's interesting because here it sounds like somebody, this Stephen R.G. Jones, is using some critical thinking and is asking the question, was there a Hawthorne effect? Interesting. So that would be worth a read, in my opinion. Here's one that talks about, in the opinion of many observers, most serious malady from which the social sciences suffer at the present stage of their development is their compartmentalism. Okay, so here we see that this is going to take a theoretical approach to the social sciences. So this article, I think, would be worth looking at. Here's an article by in the American Sociological Review, the Hawthorne experiments first statistical interpretation. Well, I would think that would be a good one. So far what we're seeing is that these particular articles do appear to be relevant to a general study anyway of the Hawthorne effect. Here's one on motivation theory and job design. So if we're talking about the Hawthorne studies and you want to know, are they motivational? Are they do they help the organization produce more productive output from workers, well, this article might be a pretty good article to read. It comes from the Journal of Business, so that's a scholarly uh, journal. And here it's talking about job design too. So I would think that managers might be interested in reading that. Here is one that takes a critical approach. The author studies a radical criticism. Now, when we talk about critical thinking or criticism, we don't mean it in the popular way. It doesn't mean being mean and nasty to someone, like I'm going to be critical of the way that you walk, or I'm going to be critical of the way that you hold your pencil. What it means is I'm going to be analytical in the way that I read what you've written, or I'm going to be analytical about what you say in your speech, or I'm going to review your article or your paper, and I'm going to put on a pair of glasses that through which I can see your paper and what you've done in a rather analytical way. So we develop those analytical skills. We should have begun to develop those skills. I wish I could say that those start in high school, but I don't think they really do. College, yes, I can say, at least from my perspective as an undergraduate instructor in sociology, we do focus on critical thinking, critical skills, and definitely in the graduate program, you are required to develop your critical thinking skills, your analytical skills. And the way you go about doing that is by using critical thinking and the tools that critical thinkers use. And the tools that critical thinkers use, one of those tool sets are called theories. And theories, what they are, well, let me say what they do is they produce a perspective that's unique to that particular theory. So let me give an example. If I were writing, as you will later in this course, I think week 6 or 7, you're going to be talking about power. So if I were talking about power in the corporate environment, I need to develop some perspectives on what do we mean when we talk about power. So I will probably, if I were writing this, I would first go to a theory called feminism. Feminism is a theory, and feminism focuses on the perspective that men typically have more power, or are given more power, or take more power than women do. So there tends to be a great bias in the literature, many pieces of literature that especially used to be read, where the bias was towards males, and most research, for instance, was done by males. It was usually conducted on males, and so there was a tremendous male bias in especially literature from many years ago. So, especially at the early part of the 20th century and prior. Um, Feminism began to change that, and began to help us refocus and say that's not true. And feminism introduced another theory called theory of intersectionality. So when we start talking about privilege, um, uh, what we see is that there are many types of privilege that we all enjoy. Uh, I'll explain that in a minute. And by the same token, there is, just as there are privileges that people enjoy, there is the opposite where people experience oppression, and most oppression is experienced as a result of the privilege of others. So what happens is those who are privileged, and I would venture to say that everyone that's listening to this has certain privileges, and your privileges are a direct and indirect cause of the oppression of others. So, for instance, when we talk about male privilege, that means that anyone who is not male will find themselves experiencing varying degrees and varying forms of oppression. So, for instance, in the workplace, the privilege of being male in the workplace is that males tend to be paid more than women who do the same job. Research shows that women are oppressed in that area of compensation, in that they earn only 70% of what their male counterparts earn. That is oppression, and that is privilege. Men enjoy that privilege, and women experience that oppression. We can talk about race. White persons, and especially white males, enjoy more privileges, and those privileges are a direct and indirect cause of the oppression of those who are not white males. Again, we can look at the organization and we can see that many of the top jobs go to white males. Top exec, although it's changing, uh, traditionally, top leadership in organizations has been white males, and persons of color weren't able to achieve that status, and especially intersectionality says that it's not just one social description. Social descriptions are things like race, color, gender, age, health, status, and so forth. Those are all social descriptions. That privilege is never experienced only at one of those social descriptions. So we never can talk about a privilege and say we can only talk about male or female. We need to talk about it intersectionally, because not all white men experience the same privileges. For instance, white white heterosexual men enjoy more privilege than white gay males. So there is, again, if you're not white, heterosexual, and male, you will experience some oppression. If you are a person of color, lesbian, and let's say from you haven't had the privilege of a lot of education, you're going to experience more oppression than a white lesbian who has a higher degree of education. So all privilege and all oppression is always viewed from an intersectional through an intersectional lens or theory of intersectionality, which is it's a theory that comes out of feminism. We can look at another theory, conflict theory, for instance. We can look at Karl Marx, and feminism grew out of conflict theory. So we look at Marx, and we can begin to use that lens, and we can say that the rich tend to become wealthier and richer, and those who do not have that degree, they aren't the 1 or 2% in the world, they find themselves more oppressed because they can't achieve the same privileges and enjoy the same privileges as the extremely wealthy. And so they take advantage of the wealthy take advantage of the poor laborers. And so Marx said that the only way that that's going to change is through conflict, when the proletariat, who are the worker level people, rebel against the bourgeoisie, or the very rich. The term that a lot of people use today is they're being very I think it's bougie, yeah, I think it's bougie. And so what that comes from is Marx's term, the bourgeoisie, the extremely wealthy, the elite, and so you have the elite or the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And so that's a lens then that we can use to examine organizational behavior. So you look in the organization, you say, well, who has the power? Who who is it that who is it that makes the policies and all the laws, and makes everyone else follow those? Is there a benefit that the powerful or the wealthy are experiencing through the creation of those particular policies that they create? Do those policies continue to perpetuate their privileged positions, and those who aren't in those positions are merely supporting those the positions, and making it possible for those positions to exist. So those are lenses, those are perspectives that we begin to examine or look at social phenomena. That means social events through those particular lenses, and we begin to ask hard questions. We begin to ask analytical questions. We begin to ask critical questions. We begin to use criticism. I'm not, you didn't hear me being mean and nasty. I'm just stating facts, right? And I stated it through those various perspectives. And there are hundreds of these theories out there, and no one, I don't think, anyone really is an expert in any one of them. We all have our theory. Most scholars have a set of theories that they use on a regular basis. Although, for instance, I wouldn't use I wouldn't be considered a structural functionalist, but I need to understand structural functionalism, the theory of structural functionalism, in order to be able to interpret things in the world. But that doesn't mean that I would propose that I wouldn't suggest that I should be defined as someone who supports structural functionalism. I don't. What I do use and I do support are theories such as feminism, which I've mentioned, theory of intersectionality, which I've done workshops with other PhDs on theory of intersectionality. I also am I also would consider myself to be a social constructionist, someone who interprets and sees nearly everything in the world using a theory called social constructionism. Not to be confused, although they're similar, with social constructivism. So if you see those two, social constructionism, social constructivism, there are some differences between those two. But nonetheless, I would consider myself to be a social constructionist, feminist. Another theory that I use to interpret the world, or to the critical lens that I use, is symbolic interactionism. How do people interact with one another, and what are the symbols that we use in that interaction, and do those particular interactions have different meanings in different cultures? For example, in the Western culture, it is very common to shake hands, but that is not a worldwide practice. So it may mean something different in another culture. When I've read things like when you're at a dinner table, and the way that you consume or eat the food can be very different in some cultures than it is in others. For instance, in the Western culture, anyway, in certain areas of the Western culture, it's very impolite to slurp soup. For instance, you take it from your spoon and you're sipping it, you should make no noise whatsoever. Or when you're eating, you should always eat with your mouth closed, and never talk when you have food in your mouth. Those are customs. Those are things that are learned. We aren't born knowing those things. Somebody has to teach us that something is considered right or it's considered wrong, but we then begin to think, well, it's right or it's wrong for everybody in every culture, and that simply is not true. Certain practices, like for instance, I remember several years ago, somebody threw a shoe at one of the speakers, and it wasn't in the United States. It was, I believe uh, it wasn't Europe. I can't remember exactly where it was, and many of you that are students will know this more than me. But when you throw a shoe in a particular culture, that is a very degrading act. In the United States, it really has no meaning. But in another culture, it carries a great deal of meaning, and when it occurs, it can arouse all kinds of feelings and animosity. But in this country, it wouldn't it wouldn't have that meaning at all, and probably the most that would come from it would be, well, the least would be annoyance, and the most would probably be some sort of legal action for attempted assault, but it would not have any uh, ethical, moral meaning to it, really. So, what I'm saying is that when you're thinking critically, or when you're a critical thinker or analytical thinker, you are using any number of theories, and you're going to be learning this many theories in this course. You use those theories to examine the world. You're in this particular class, you'll be using those theories to examine the organization, and in particular are going to be looking at to examine organizational behaviors. How do workers respond to certain conditions, such as micromanagement, lighting, seating, power structures, there any number of benefits. I mean, any number of activities. Each of them needs to be examined by, especially by management, and MBAs are should be able to, when they complete this course anyway, and when they complete their MBA, they should be able to use those theories and the tools that they learn in their MBA program to bring greater understanding to certain practices. Typically, what happens is things are done in organizations, and oftentimes nobody knows why. And so we have to understand why things are done, and then ask the hard questions. Does it still make sense? It may have made sense when if something was created in the 1950s, but does that same behavior, does that same rule make sense in 2022? Those things need to be examined, and it's the responsibility of MBA graduates and management to make those sorts of assessments, and ask those hard questions. So that's what the research does, is we go in here and we begin to look for the research that makes sense for our particular study. Now, I want to go back to this 12,236 results. Now, if you come over here to the left, you're going to see that you have some options. You can reduce this list of 12,000 down simply by choosing journals. So maybe you're not interested in research reports and book chapters, you only want journals. But notice that's going to take it down to 10,005 just by doing that. So notice now I've reduced it down to 10,005 articles just by choosing journals. I want to bring that down a little bit more. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go down here to the subject area, and there's a lot of subject areas. So I ask myself, am I really interested in that Hawthorne studies from the perspective of agriculture? Um, Probably not. So I'm not going to select that. Notice there are actually only 35 articles that deal with Hawthorne effect and agriculture. Um, there's only one American Indian study, American Studies 989. Well, that may be worth looking at for persons that are interested in organizations in America. Anthropological articles, 117. That might be aquatic sciences. If you're in that field, that would have certainly be of interest. But let's go down here and let's look at some others. Look at business. So this is a business or an MBA class. So I think I want to see, I'm going to limit it to business, and it's going to reduce that 10,000 now down to 740 results. Now, notice that some of these articles that we were looking at before, where the relevance brought those to the top of the list, some of those articles are still there. So I think they're worth reading. The way you read them is you would go over here to download and click on download, agree or accept and download these terms and conditions. And here's the paper. So this is the way your papers will look. It has a title page, which has very important information that you'll need when you create your your references and your in-text citations. Then we go down here to the Hawthorne experiments, and we can then begin to read this article. So we would go through, we'd read all of this article, and you'll notice that in this particular article, there are no, there is not a reference section. So that's not ideal, in my opinion, but the reason that they don't have a reference section is that this is not written in an APA format. This is written in some other style. There's, I don't know, probably, let's say there's 1,000, I know there's at least hundreds and hundreds of styles. APA is one of them. American Sociological Association, the ASA, they have a style. The APA, that's what we use. American Psychological Association, that's what they use, we use. So this particular journal does not use APA, it uses whatever this is. So it's the references are there. It's just not, it's not APA, which is what most or many of us prefer. But anyway, good article. You go through and you read it. And you make a determination. Does this really address what I'm looking for in my particular response? Let's look at the next one: motivation theory and job design. Let's take a look at it. So I'm going to click download. And again, here's the information that you need for your reference and in-text citation. And here's the article, Motivation Theory and Job Design. Let's look at this. This is, okay, again, they use footnotes. Let's take a look at the end. This one, notice that they do have a conclusion, which you're required to do in your papers too. But unfortunately, this would be like a second level heading, but it's not formatted according to APA. And you have, this is a second level heading, but it's not APA. This is a first level heading, but again, it's not written according to APA standards. So anyway, the article's worth reading, but this is not written in APA. Let's look at another one. A lot of these are economic. This might be a good one too. Was there really a Hawthorne effect at the Hawthorne plant? An analysis of the original illumination experiments. This is done by the American Economic Journal. So again, it's not, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to change this because I want to show you APA. So I'm going to go over here to Oh, here's one that you should choose, management and organizational behavior. So you could choose business and you could choose that and you could choose, you don't have to choose just one. You can choose numerous. Uh, I'm going to choose, I want to go down here to sociology and I'm going to choose sociology too. So let's take a look at this. Was there a Hawthorne effect? And this comes from the American Journal of Sociology. So I'm going to download this and let's take a look at the format. Well, let me take a. Okay, so you'll notice here that it does have a reference section. Notice that the references are done in alphabetical order. This is not APA. When you get really good at APA, you're going to notice this stuff right away. How do I know this is not APA? It looks like it, but it's not. And one of the ways that I know that is because it has not used sentence case for titles. It's capitalizing all of these words in the title, and we do not do that in APA. Okay, so notice that all of these are all these titles are capitalized. We don't do that. So let me find one, and I'm going to go over here to, I'm going to get rid of sociology, and I'm going to go down to psychology. And this one is, okay, just as a demonstration purpose, let's take a look at this. Let's look at the reference section. Okay, so this reference section is APA. This is the way your references will look. So your references will have the author's last name and first initial, comma, author's last name, initials, comma. Notice that the date is in parentheses followed by a period. Notice that the title is written in what we call sentence case. That means that only the first word is capitalized and the first word after a colon is capitalized. All the rest of the words are lowercase unless they're proper names. So let's see if we can find one here that would have a proper name in it. It's hard to find because we just rarely use uh, okay, here's a good example. All right. Trauma and nostalgia, colon. Notice the N is capitalized because it's the first word after the colon. New aspects on the coping of aging Holocaust survivors. Notice that Holocaust is a proper noun and therefore it is capitalized. So we capitalize first words in the title, the first word after a colon, and proper names. And then what we do is we identify in italics, and notice it's all capitalized, the name of the journal. So we do capitalize the name of the journal. We don't capitalize the titles, but we do capitalize the name of the journal. Here's the volume number and the page numbers followed by period. Your references have to look like these. This is APA, and this is what we will be looking for when you write your paper. It has to be this way. Now, this paper has not followed APA in every respect, um, because you'll notice here that some of the section headings are not correct. So you need to follow APA though. Uh, Make sure that you do not write abstracts for any of your papers. Abstracts are written only if your paper is rather lengthy. So if you are writing a 15-page paper, you would want to write an abstract. When I wrote my dissertation, which was, I don't know, it was a few hundred pages, um, I had to write an abstract for my dissertation. It's just required. Okay, so that's about what I wanted to say in terms of doing your research. You need to pull down all the articles that you plan to use in your study, in your paper. So for that particular paper, you might pull down, maybe you go through and you read maybe 10, maybe 8 articles that look pretty good, and you may decide that only 3 of those articles are really appropriate for your paper. Don't use things that aren't appropriate. Only choose to use articles that support your paper. So you'll go back into your Word document here, and you're going to uh, then begin to write your paper. So here in this particular section, you're going to write a paragraph or two that tells your reader what your paper is about. You should write this last. Write your introduction last. Do not label it introduction. After the title, first level heading, just begin writing the 1 or 2 paragraphs that tell the reader what they can expect to read in your paper. Okay? Do not copy the instructions. Don't do this. Don't go over here to uh, let me go to the course. See, do not do this. Don't come over and do not do this. Define and discuss the, okay? Don't do that. What you can do is you could do something like this. In this paper, I will define and discuss the behaviors of micromanagement, which should not be capitalized, and specifically how they might relate to the observer effect. Well, we don't need all that. Let's just say how they relate to the Hawthorne effect. Actually, we could write it this way because it we don't capitalize the names of theories. So Hawthorne we would, because that's the name of, that's a proper name, but a Hawthorne effect. So no manager wants to be labeled as a micromanager. So that's not appropriate as a introduction. So what can we say here? Um, Okay, so what I would, if I were doing the paper, I would want to demonstrate that I'm doing some thinking, some critical thinking. So this question is, I didn't write these questions, by the way. These are written by the university. This seems to be implying some things that I don't necessarily, as a critical thinker, I wouldn't necessarily agree with. So I may want to bring out, this is a perfect place to bring out that argument and say, this paper argues that some managers do not want to be labeled as a micromanager. However, my paper argues that micromanagement is appropriate in some work situations. I argue that in some work situations, micromanagement can bring about a greater sense of trust among some workers. Okay, now if I'm going to make that kind of a statement, I need to be able to support that. So I better be able to go into the literature and find where we just were. I better find some things that are going to support this argument that I'm making. This is my position in my paper. I'm arguing that some work situations, micromanagement can bring about greater sense of trust among some workers. Well, what would be a situation where that might exist? It's unlikely that this would be true at a at an executive level. It's unlikely that it's going to be true at, let's say, a professional level, where even outside of executives and management. For instance, a programmer is not an executive, and nor do they necessarily have positions in management. But based on their skills and their levels of education, it's unlikely that programmers would be motivated by someone who is a micromanager. So my argument would start to fail if I were focusing on those groups. So I have to look at it and say, well, where would this be true? Is it true, for instance, that persons who are working on extremely detailed technical work, where only one person is considered an expert in that particular domain, would then need to, at some point, maybe not constantly, but at some point, is going to need to micromanage some work that's being done. Well, let's say early in the when they were first working on the atomic energy, atomic bombs. So it is unlikely that everybody possessed the same levels of knowledge of physics and rockets and all the other things that are required. One would have to know. Somebody was the ultimate expert, and as somebody who is working with that expert, I might expect them to come to me and do some micromanagement to make sure that I'm crossing all of the T's and I'm dotting all of the I's, because the welfare of millions of people are at stake. Or we go into a hospital situation where people are working to become doctors, medical doctors, and they are interns, and they go through a number of stages where they are micromanaged by a superior or a team of superiors, because if they were not micromanaged, the health of people are the health of many people could be in jeopardy. So micromanagement isn't always a bad thing, as this article or as this question seems to imply. Therefore, I think if we apply critical thinking, analytical thinking, we could write a paper that argues against this question, the assumptions of this question, but I need to support that. So if I were doing this paper, and based on what I just said, those two examples, I'd go back to the JSTOR and I would see, are there any articles that are written on hospitals, in hospital internship programs and micromanagement, or they may call it something else, but you need to look for that and say, is there something that supports this argument that I have? And if it does, then you want to make sure that you bring that into your discussion, your paper, and argue against some of the assumptions of these questions. It's called critical thinking, and that's what we're looking for. Do I care if you know all the details about the Hawthorne studies? No. I don't want a history lesson on the Hawthorne. I don't want the dates, the location. I don't want a biography of um, the team that did the study. Nobody cares. That would be a good book report for high schoolers, or that might fly in undergraduate studies. It does not fly in graduate level work. In graduate level work, those things can be read by any of us. I can go out to Wikipedia, which don't ever use Wikipedia in any of your papers, but I could go out to Wikipedia and I can look up all that stuff. What I can't go out and look up is an argument that you're making, or hopefully making, that brings in some new insights or questions or challenges. And bring that into your paper. Think critically, think deeply and analytically, and ask questions like I did. Does that really make sense that micromanagement is all, that somebody doesn't want to be considered a micromanager? Well, maybe. And then so I would say, well, what do we mean when we say micromanager? It's just, has it taken on some baggage? Has the term taken on some baggage that it really doesn't deserve? That micromanaging in certain situations is appropriate, it is desirable, it is necessary because it could save lives. So micromanaging isn't a bad term, as this seems to imply. This paper argues that some managers do not want to be labeled a micromanager. Well, that's not always true. I don't think it should be always true. Now, maybe we need to begin to reframe the meanings of some of the words that we use, or find different words. So there I'm getting into social constructionism, where the language that we use creates the realities that exist in the world. So all of what we see as reality or as truth, whether it's the big T truth or the little t truth, that those are all of them are social constructions, that we aren't born with that understanding or that knowledge, that somebody had to tell us that we're supposed to believe certain things. And if we don't believe those things, we will be considered as outcasts in a particular culture or society. For instance, in some societies, if you don't, or cultures, if you don't believe in God, then you are considered a social outcast. You will be condemned. Some places you could be killed. If you, in Christian church, that used to be true. You know, if you didn't believe in God and Jesus, then you could have been murdered. And so those types of things are, when we look at, when we analyze those social that social type of social phenomena, we look at it through the lens of social constructionism, with the understanding that, you know, all of those things are social constructions, that society constructs religion, society constructs God, society constructs the belief systems that we have, society constructs our political systems, society constructs how we do justice in a culture or in a society. They decide that persons who are white and privileged will not have to suffer the same penalties that persons who are poor, are of persons of color, or are considered other in society, they will suffer greater penalties and than persons who are privileged. Those are all social constructions. Gender is a social construction. Uh, Up until the recent decade, there were only two genders, male and female, but we know today that's not true, that there are dozens of genders, and one has the right to claim whatever gender they choose. That having someone else determine their gender may not always be the appropriate path for all individuals. So we find that some people who were, you know, they were identified at birth as male or as female, later determined that isn't the correct gender for them. So that's going beyond the scope of this course, but the point is that it is through those theories, through those various perspectives, then that we see the world in different ways, that we can explore the world in many different ways by asking a lot of different questions. Those theories then help us to frame the particular questions that we ask about various social phenomena. The theories that you'll learn in this class, which are focused around organizations, organizational theories, those will frame the questions that you should be asking about the social phenomena within organizations, or the stated another way, the activities or the behaviors within your organizations. You need to examine those through particular lenses. And right now, you may not have those lenses, but within 8 weeks, you will. So if you stick it out and you do the hard work between now and the end of the course, you're going to have an opportunity to see, literally, to see the world and experience the world in a wholly different way than you do today, because you're going to gain tools, knowledge, and theories to see and examine in ways that you really can't do right now. So in your paper, you want to write your introduction and tell the reader, here's what you're going to write about. And then you're going to begin to divide up or to section out or to create headings that tell us how you're going to approach that paper. So up in your introduction, you're going to say in your next paragraph. So this tells us what you're arguing, and then to accomplish this, or to my paper will consist of three key sections. In the first section, I discuss the meaning of, and I don't know, in the second section, and then whatever you're going to do. Finally, I discuss whatever you're going to discuss. And then and then you go through and you do this. Create section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4, how many ever sections you're going to write. Then at the end, you go to the end of your paper and you write conclusion. And that's a second level heading. And you're going to then use the APA style, and you're going to write the conclusion to your paper and write a very clear and concise conclusion. In this paper, and then tell us what you did. So in the beginning, you're telling us what the reader can expect, and then in the conclusion, you're telling us what conclusions you've drawn based on this particular research project that you did. What did you learn? What maybe changed your mind on an idea that you had? Maybe at the conclusion you find out you're this is a hard one for, especially I think MBA and maybe PhDs, is your conclusion may be, I was all washed up in my thinking. I mean, that's valid. If you do a study, the purpose of your study is to find out, is my thinking valid? And it could be that the study shows that my thinking was not valid. I'm really wrong. That's typically done when you're doing the actual experiments. You're not doing any of that, so it's unlikely that you might draw that conclusion, because your conclusion really is going to be a synopsis of your paper, which is the tests or the experiments or the research or the study, however you want to term it, has already been done. And what you're doing is you're reading the end results of those studies, which for the most part, if they've been published, most of them are valid studies. Now, they don't all agree with one another. And so you could say, after reading multiple articles on this particular issue, my original notion was that micromanagement is not always a bad thing, and but based on my research, I've now conclude that micromanagement should be avoided at least as micromanagement is commonly understood. Something like that, that might fly. But you need to be very, very clear. Be very clear and concise in your conclusion, just as you should be clear and concise in your introduction. In fact, your whole paper needs to be clear and concise. And make sure that throughout your paper, you are using I'm going to get rid of these. These were just examples down here. I'm going to get rid of these. And then I'm going to go back here and note. Oh, I can't. Well, anyway, make sure that your in-text citations are correct. Notice the use of et al. If you don't know what that means, you need to. Little et al. Period, comma, date, and page, because this is a quote. Watch the video that I have on YouTube. It's in. You'll see the link to it in section 4 of the course guide. That video you should watch after you watch this video, and that provides you with more detailed information on publishing your final paper into the Moodle text box, and some things that you want to know about in-text citations and references I cover in that video. So I'm going to now conclude this video, and we will